I'm Andrew, part of the solutions engineering team here at Attio. And hopefully, you all are either testing out Attio or a customer of Attio. So if you're in the latter bucket or the former, thank you for taking a look at Attio. Our focus today is on prompting. So I think there has been discussion around how we set up AI attributes and some other AI features in Attio in some past workshops. So definitely encourage people to go to attio.community, look at some of those old workshops. But today we're actually going to get a little more into the nitty gritty of how to think about writing prompts. And this is oftentimes a little bit of a nebulous topic because I've seen a wide variety of attempts at making the AI do what we want to do. So this is going to be a session sharing our findings, and like any other thing, it's always going to be iterative. As Attio continues to add more AI features, we'll revisit some of these topics in the future. In the chat, we do have my colleague Fred, who is part of the solutions team as well. He will be monitoring the chat for any questions. So if you have any general questions related to the workshop topics, feel free to ask it in the chat. I will ask everyone here that if you have a very particular question to your use case, that might be better served by reaching out to our support team, and you'll be able to reach out to our support team via the in-app chat in Attio, right? So at the end, we'll leave a link on how to find that button if you don't know how to find it. But I do want to encourage, if you have more general questions, like what is AI attributes, where can I find that? Fred is more than equipped to answer that Q&A in the chat. All right. So just to set a quick breakdown of where we want to go today, the three broad areas we're going to cover is first, how do we actually want to think about prompting? And I'm going to leave you all with 5 concrete tips or principles that you can take away with when you do your own prompting. Second, we're just going to talk about what's actually possible. You may have seen some of the AI attributes in Attio, but you don't really know what you can actually do with it. So I'll give you some ideas. And then in the third section on going good to great, we're just going to go in platform and see 2 things in action. One is how do prompts look like in the context of AI attributes? And number 2, how do prompts look like in the context of insight templates? So if any of you are on our pro plan or higher, you're going to be able to have access to call recording. And one of the awesome things we have is this insight templates concept. If you're not familiar, we'll show everything in a bit. All right, we still have a few folks trickling in. So just for the last few folks, quick reminder, chat is available, but if you have specific questions to your use case and account, I do recommend you reach out to customer support. And I think that's enough level setting. So let's get right into it. When we think about prompting, these are those 5 principles that I've found working with my solutions team, and these are sort of the things we've sort of agreed. You can read all the white papers you want, but this workshop will just basically give you the TLDR. And I think the one guiding principle to set your expectations properly around prompting and AI in general is think of it like an intern, right? So when we think of an intern, what starts to come to mind? An intern is someone who's capable, they're well-meaning, but oftentimes they're kind of lacking context and they can't necessarily assume your intentions, right? They don't have years of experience to understand your one-liner question. So AI is very much like an intern, and this is the heuristic I use when I write my prompts. Don't assume that AI knows anything. It has the ability to process complex questions, but you need to set the context. You need to tell that, here's an example, and even the more specific you can be about the output you expect, the better it'll perform, right? So a bad prompt, or I guess I should say a less efficient prompt, is find news about this company. Vague. It's if you start unpacking that question, it's like, what news do you want? What kind of format do you expect it to be? Should I ignore certain things? Should I focus on certain things, right? So make that assumption built in when you do your prompts. And this ties to the second point, which is how do we actually structure our prompts? Not every prompt needs to be super complicated. There is a technical term distinguishing a 0-shot prompt versus a 1-shot prompt. So if you ever heard that term, basically what it's saying is a shot is an example, right? So a 0-shot prompt is just literally a question and you don't provide an example on what you're sort of expecting. And then a 1-shot prompt is a version of this where you do provide an example. There's also few-shot prompts, but honestly, those are only really tailored for very, very specific prompts. For the a large majority of people, a 1-shot prompt is usually good enough, especially in the context of the Attio CRM. So basically the way to think about your prompts is, broadly speaking, if you can hit all 4 of these, that's golden, right? So when you write a prompt, wherever that prompt input is, you basically want to set some kind of mission statement and then a context specific to this question, and then give them an example and then an output. So in the example I have on the screen, just to sort of explain the mission statement, and you can very literally write mission statement. If you're coming from a little more of like a coding background, you can use tags. It's like tag mission. But the idea is, say, you're taking the LLM or AI from a very generic, all-knowing thing and having it assume a role. So in this one, I'm saying you are a research analyst who summarizes company news. So now, instead of the AI trying to make some assumptions, maybe your question, it might be about chef's work or about being a policymaker. No, it's just about being a research analyst. So that limits the world. So it presets the model to think about certain results and certain answers. The following part about context, and I'm saying we're looking for news specifically around hiring or firing. And the reason we care about this, for example, is in an account research context, we want to know, are we looking at a company that's growing or not growing? A company that's growing is usually a little easier to sell to. And then the best thing you can do is provide an example. So this is actually an example of the output. Technova, you say state, hiring, and then summary of initiative, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is basically telling it like, this is kind of what I expect. And then if you want to be super literal in certain prompts, you can say like you expect a string versus text or some other output format. Now, generally speaking, in the context of Attio, I would say maybe the 4th section output format isn't always necessary, because our AI attributes and AI block features do come out with a certain expected formats. Usually it's going to be a tag or some raw text, right? So at least in our context, the output format is a little more defined for you. The other thing you'll be able to do, and this is more specific to Attio, which makes it exciting, is if you think about all the attributes on your person record, your company record, your deal record, you can basically take these things and use it as variables inside of your prompt, right? So a very good example is go to this company's website. The variable is the domain attribute, and then look at their most recent news or product announcements, something like that. This allows these AI agents to effectively do RAG, retrieval augmented generative abilities, and basically it's going to go to the website, pull the info in as part of the data it's considering. So this opens up a lot of use cases, because another example in a deal context is if you take the deal value, the ICP, some internal proprietary attributes you have, you can basically use this to summarize and score. So a lot of times it's going to be useful for scoring. The other big tip I'll say is AI is not a deterministic system, right? So it's a fancy term to basically say like the same input will always produce the same output. Think back to our intern example, right? Even if we give the same instructions to 3 different interns, they were always going to give us like or not always, but very likely to give us slightly different results. And so one of the things that people might want to actually think about is error handling, right? So usually, 99% of the time, your prompt's going to produce the result you want, but what if it doesn't? So I'll give you an example here. In our workflows feature, we have this switch block, and that switch block actually takes from an earlier AI block that reasons the time zone of someone based off of their location attribute, right? So the 3 potential scenarios we're going to have is route someone to somewhere in the United States, route someone to London, and then in the off chance that our AI reasoning says, Asia, we actually just want some catch-all bucket for those folks. So this is actually part of the onboarding logic we use in our workflows to route our customers when we do onboarding. So, one of the things I do encourage people to think about with AI is even if it's not 100% perfect, a lot of times AI will take us to 98, 99% of efficacy. And if you think about the efficiency gains there, it's still very much worth when we have these occasional error handling. So for us, for example, I would say about 99% of the time, our customers are going to land in either the America or London bucket. But sometimes things happen. So we do want to make sure to account for that fact. Last thing I'll always say is always test, right? Always test because this is not a deterministic system, right? The results will always be slightly different. And this is often how you find these principles about prompting is you test it, you run the prompt, and you're like, oh, that didn't come out the way I expected. So more so than any other feature, like if you're a developer, like debugging, QA, whatever you want to call it, always test. We'll come back to these so you can take a screenshot if you want. But let's move to the second part, which is really talking about what are actually some use cases for prompts. And I'll actually have the prompt examples on screen. So I'll read out loud just the general structure of the prompt, not very literally every word. You can view it in the recording afterwards. But there are broadly 4 buckets that I personally use a lot today. There's many more, but the first one is going to be doing research. So we do have a concept of a research agent, and this is basically an attribute on my company object. So the prompt down here basically reads, can you find the most recent news about this company related to hiring or layoffs? And if you can't find anything, leave a quick note indicating you were not able to find anything. So if you recall what we just said, the statement about if you can't find anything, leave a quick note indicating you were not able to, that's error handling, right? Because we assume most companies will have some notion of news, but sometimes they don't. So this is a really good attribute. Do recommend you check this out in your account if you haven't tested this already. Really, really good for account research, really good for person research. And it basically is another layer on top of some of the enrichment attributes we already have. Second bucket of things you could probably do with these prompts is classifying. So this example I have is a little bit of a mixture. You could actually take variables from those company records and combine it with external research. So basically, we have like 4 data points that we consider an ICP. These 4 data points are going to be entirely proprietary to our company, right? So in this case, we're looking at date founded, amount raised, location, and whether it's a B2B business model. Now, if you really break down these attributes, this is actually more complicated than it looks initially, right? To determine if a company is a B2B business model is not super obvious. You actually have to go to the website. You have to kind of look at the concepts they say, maybe read the description, look at the products they actually offer. And this is really a good example of how AI can do that low-level reasoning work, right? If you actually had to write a script to reason how a B2B business model company looks like just based off their website, that's some really complicated algorithm, right? So in this case, we basically have a output of ICP or non-ICP. In other words, it's just a bucketing our records into certain qualities that we determine internally. And so the downstream effects is we can use AI to do this reasoning. We can build tabled views, filtered views, and you can even use this attribute in a different workflow, right? So maybe ICP customers get invited to our San Francisco meetup event, something like that. 2 more, and then we'll go into platform just to actually see this live. But reasoning is related to the time zone thing I talked about. Now, you'll actually see this is an example of using best practices in constructing the prompt. So it's much more longer than expected. But you'll see there's like a mission statement saying they're an intelligent calendar booking assistant. There's also context in the middle that gives them some examples of edge cases, right? So if someone is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, is that closer to the US or is that closer to London? So you can basically give examples to sort of clarify what you expect in those edge cases in terms of time zone. The other thing I'll call out is sometimes, this is my pro tip, sometimes you can just use another LLM to write the prompt for the LLM in Attio, right? So for example, I will say, hey, ChatGPT, I want to write this prompt, but help me actually just write the verbiage because I'm too lazy. And basically, it produces a better prompt than probably the one you can actually write yourself. So really, really good for doing this kind of reasoning logic. And then the last bucket I'll call out is this data cleanup concept. So 2 use cases to give you right here. The one I'm showing on the screen is a reformat phone numbers. So in Attio, if you are already a customer, you're well aware that we require E164 phone format. But sometimes maybe that's just not very readable. And maybe for whatever reason, we want to copy that phone number and then put it into an email. Maybe the email we're sending to the customer is just saying, hey, can you verify your email or phone number, right? So we can basically have another attribute that stores that same data in a reformatted fashion. And the quick 0-shot prompt I did right here is convert the phone number, and I passed in the variable for the phone number for the person, from E164 to this US format if it is a US phone number. Otherwise, leave it as is, right? So you can incorporate this kind of conditional logic. And it now becomes super easy to see that Luke and Jake, they're not American people or American phone numbers, and then Benjamin and Sally are, right? So that's one example. Another good example in terms of data cleanup is if you think about all the permutations of people's job titles, right? So if you think about my job title, I am a solutions engineer. I may also be a solutions consultant. I may also be a solutions architect. But generally speaking, we know what the job is about, which is communicating technical concepts to new customers. And so if you have your own internal designation for those concepts, you can basically use this to do your own classification of job title, right? So maybe CTO or office of the chief officer of technology, that all gets collapsed into CTO. And that makes your life easier because if you think back to like filtering, when we filter a table view in Attio, it becomes hard to account for all these permutations of titles. But if we do this data cleanup beforehand, now we know we have a predictable format on how we describe people. All right, so last section here, let's just do 2 examples live to show you how we can go good to great. I've already built out the prompts just to save us a little bit of time. So let's go into platform real quick, and I will share my screen. So let's start with AI attributes really quick. So just as a refresher, we are on the company object with table, the company object record table. And what you're seeing right here is a bunch of companies, just arbitrary companies. The 2 columns I want to draw your attention to is this recent hiring news, 0-shot, and then recent hiring news, 1-shot. So the reason I made this distinction is so you can see the difference in results. So just to show you the 0-shot example, the prompt I basically have is 1 sentence. Not bad, but could be better, right? And it's basically saying the example we had earlier, can you find some recent news on the internet about hiring or firing? So not bad. Let me just cancel out of that. And all right. And then we'll see basically, so for these top companies right here, for example, United Airlines is hiring 10K employees, and then it's a little less than what they expected. You'll see in Square, the verbiage is a little different, but it's talking about certain roles here. So I think we can do better, right? This becomes hard to read because the information coming out of the prompt is not necessarily consistent. So sometimes it's saying one thing up front and then one thing later. So we do have another example of this with a refined prompt that is a 1-shot example. So you'll see the difference here. Using that same prompt structure guideline that I provided earlier, we're setting the mission statement, and we're basically saying you're an analyst, right? These are the things we're looking for, which is the state, either hiring or firing, a summary, projections, and then any miscellaneous points. So that helps us from just the visual perspective on how to more easily see the information. So now you can easily see company, Amazon, state is firing, summary of the initiative, this is firing in the Alexa division, helpful, and then it says how many, it's 500, right? So now at the end, we just tell them, take the recent news, and we're giving a domain just to help it know exactly which Amazon, right? If for whatever reason there's another Amazon out there, the domain helps us be very specific on the uniqueness. And then if you compare the results, right, this one's not bad for United Airlines, but this one is a lot more consistent. I can always look at this and go, okay, state, summary, projections, miscellaneous points. And if I go here, state, summary, projections, miscellaneous points. And so if you think about this is a little more structured, and we could take this even further by following up a prompt with a prompt. And this is getting into the concept of chaining our prompts together. But we can basically take this and create one more prompt that is a classification. And we're basically going to say hiring or firing. And what we're going to say, based on the state mentioned in the prior attribute, right? The one-shot attribute, look at the text around state. If it says hiring, output hiring. If it says firing, output firing. And so the options we'll give the LLM is hiring or firing, right? And so basically, if I do this now, if you think about the column called recent hiring news, this is more like the raw text, but this helps us build a quick, easy filter. So let me just repeat right here. Right, so it'll just do that classification for us. And if you think about it later, what I talked about doing the filter, you can do a filter up here, and basically you'll say hiring or firing, and then is hiring. So now we're just focused on that. So we do have the raw output as well as the classification, which is more clean for us. So this is just the beginning of AI attribute prompting. Hopefully this gets you pretty excited. The other example I want to talk about in the last few minutes here is insight templates. So let me change my screen and I'll go to one other example. So this is for folks on our professional plan or hire, and basically you will be able to use insight templates to break apart a call into a readable transcript, if you will. So the raw transcript's here, right? But honestly, I mean, between you guys and I, like even I don't necessarily have time to watch the recording or read the entire transcript. I really care about a few specific things. And so being candid here, I actually use this to get up to speed so that my account executives don't have to spend 15 minutes with me talking about the deal, bringing me up to speed. I can basically rely on this insight template to produce this result. And so the summary is an included feature, but basically I've done a similar thing where I've given a prompt validating, does this check against what we call SPICE? That's a qualification framework. I'm also looking for things like, what is the data model discussed? What's tech stack? What's the proficiency of the point of contact? And then a mutual action plan. So if anything is empty right here, like desired state or stakeholders, now it's super clear to me that, okay, maybe there's something in terms of discovery we haven't done. So I need to speak with the account executive and make sure we actually understand what's going on in these parts. And so to assemble this insight template, let me go show you real quick. Under calls, there's going to be this insight templates tab. And then the template I have is right here. So let's just look at the spiced example. But basically, similar framing, right? We're saying you are an expert sales coach. Okay, awesome. Now we are narrowing the world of possible outputs. Now, not all sales coaches maybe know spiced. A lot of people are more familiar with BANT or MEDIC or MEDPIC. And so just to be super clear, it's not making assumptions about what spiced is. I clearly explain what spiced is. And then this is an example of how I do, or I am asking for the prompt output. So I'm saying, indicate whether it's clearly discussed. And if it's not discussed, say not discussed. So you'll see in this example over here, it actually does say compelling event not discussed. So I know, okay, either we missed it or maybe it's just something that we just forgot to ask about. Similar thing down here. So you'll basically be able to contain multiple prompts. This is one prompt, this is another prompt, so on and so forth. And you can put as many prompts as you want into one insight template. So basically you'll be able to get yourself up to speed in I would say like 3 minutes, right? Think about the old world where we had to watch the call recording for 30 minutes and try to figure out what's going on. Now, 3 minutes and we're up to speed. All right, I see we have some questions here, but I do want to do time check. I know we're close to time here, so I'll wrap up the content and just share my screen one more time. If anyone wants to take a screenshot. Next steps I do recommend is go out, test AI attributes, test the prompts, and go ahead and take a screenshot of this. You can use this for understanding your prompts, making it better. And we will have a recording for this workshop. All right, I'm just gonna do a quick check in the chat to see if there's any general questions we can answer. Robbie, I'll take a stab at your question. So the question for everyone is there any way to take those insights and use them in workflows? We are on the roadmap to work on a API for that, so just stay tuned. I think our call recording is good, but I think there's things we're looking to do with it to make it even more extensible. So this is really the foundation. As you continue to work on Attio, we're going to have many more things coming your way in terms of prompting and stitching together other objects. But I would say for the most part, focus your prompting in 3 areas, which is going to be the table of your records, your AI workflows feature, and then the insight templates. And I'll do one more question and we can wrap this up. So do you recommend using AI attributes as columns or using workflows? Generally speaking, this is a really good question, Will. For visibility and trying to understand what's being done, I actually very often like to store information as attributes. And then if I need to see it in the table view, I can. Now, for everyone here, right, table views, you don't have to add every attribute into the view itself, so it can just be a hidden column. So this is even just a helpful tip for if you do any sort of intermediate calculations. You can store these for easy debugging. The reason I say this is if you keep the AI block purely in the workflow, you have to go into the workflow, you have to go into the run itself to find what was outputted by that specific block in that run in that workflow. So it's a little just, honestly, it's a little easier to keep the attributes in the object record table itself. All right, I think, yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks everyone for joining today. Look forward to seeing what you all build out and reach out to our support team. Oh yeah, let me leave the link for that here in the chat. This is how we'll reach out to our support team. Alan, yes, the answer is yes. It's basically you're going to have to allow the AI to multi-select, but yeah. Cool. Look forward to seeing what you all build.